Hey guys, welcome to the first and final installation of the Anteater Nation podcast. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Bridget. With me today are my lovely co-hosts, Sophia and Ella.
Hello.
Hey.
So today's podcast is going to be very special as we'll be focusing on the theme of race, literacy, and power. This may seem like a broad topic, mainly because it is, but that's okay. It makes a lot of room for discussion about things like how racial privilege has affected education for some races, or how immigration and learning new languages impacts someone's experience and opportunities. So in this segment, we want to focus on privilege and immigration issues in the United States. So to give us some background on this topic, Sophia will give us the rundown of a funny guy who talks about both of these topics.
Okay, so this guy, Hassan Minhaj, is a Muslim American comedian. For reference, he's a correspondent on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and he was also the host of the 2017 White House Correspondents' Dinner. Right now, I want to talk about his Netflix special, Homecoming King. In it, he speaks out on racism in America. He starts with his origin story being raised by immigrant parents in Davis, California, which is a predominantly white city. He goes on to talk about his experiences with racism and the differences between his immigrant parents and him, an American-born citizen. One of my favorite scenes from the comedic act is when his family is about to go meet his fiancée and her family at her house. Right at the doorstep, his father backs out on Minhaj, and he says, "Lo kya kahenge," what will people think? Just from watching the video on Netflix, you can hear the whole crowd gasping. I even gasped myself. He plays off the disappointment of his father with humor by saying that every time a Muslim child disappoints his father, a star falls out of the sky.
So any thoughts?
Oh gosh, it broke my heart to hear him reflecting on how his family could only focus on what others perceived and not on his love for his fiancée. Honestly, I can't imagine this because my family could care less about what race the other person I'm dating is, and my family isn't really that religious, so they don't care about stuff like that either. They just care about if the person's nice or not.
Yeah, for me, hearing this story was heartbreaking as well, but I knew exactly why he decided to include it. These kinds of incidents happen so often, and I think it was important that Minhaj talked about it to spread awareness. I thought it was helpful that he incorporated the comedy with it to help lighten the situation, but not erase the seriousness behind it.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's so sad to say that the reason why we have this public outcry from people like Minhaj is because of the 2016 presidential election. Since Donald Trump has become president, racism has been even more of a hot topic issue. Another thing that Minhaj briefly talks about is how difficult it is for immigrants to receive citizenship in the United States. What's ironic about this is that literally a few days after his performance, on February 1st, 2017, Trump enforced a travel ban which gave the border officials the right to refuse travelers who were in flight when the rules went into effect. It was quickly denied by the courts, but this past April, Trump was trying again to pass this ban through the Supreme Court. His new order is supposed to ban travelers from Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, North Korea, and Venezuela. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's because he said such outrageous things, like building a wall along the whole Mexican border. I saw a CNN video last year that talked about the logistics of it. Apparently, it would take about $10.5 billion to make a well-structured wall that spans about some 2,000 miles. When he talked about it while he was campaigning, I thought it was ridiculous and just for press and attention.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. It was definitely all for attention, and the worst part is that people ate up his stupidity. The concept of building a wall, along with many other controversial and outrageous ideas that Trump proposed, inspired many closeted racists to come out with outbursts, including horrible vandalizations that were racist, anti-LGBT, and just plain hateful, immediately following the election of Trump.
It amazes me how many hateful people there are out there. Anyways, thank you for your inputs. Now we're going to switch gears now and introduce a feminist that openly talks about white privilege in America.
Peggy McIntosh is such an influential woman. She's done a lot over the years to help enlighten people about racial privilege that can be seen in feminism. Like, she started this great organization in the 1980s called the National Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity Project, or SEED for short. It's super cool because it has peer-led programs that focus on creating more diverse and equal environments. When I was a kid, my elementary school had a seed program that my mom participated in. I think she had a really good experience from it and learned a lot about privilege, diversity, and equality. But more on Macintosh, we'll be focusing on her famous essay, which is called White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. It seems a little bit dated because she uses the word knapsack, but she has got some super interesting ideas in it about the ignorance of white privilege and her self-realization of these privileges that she benefits from on a daily basis. She gives examples of everyday scenarios that may not seem that significant at first glance, but such as how band-aids only come in a certain color. But these commonly overlooked things really show how deeply ingrained racial equalities and privilege are in American society. What do you guys think?
Personally, her article is one of my favorites. It is interesting to read about privilege coming from a white person's perspective, especially since it was written 3 decades ago. I really liked how she added the list of her own experiences because many white people tend to be oblivious to their privilege, and she gave proof of how she benefits from the color of her skin. This year, I got into an argument with one of my white friends about her privilege because she kept claiming that it didn't exist and that she was actually very underprivileged. I tried to make her understand that her privilege came simply from being white and that I wasn't trying to tell her that her life isn't hard. I was just saying that her struggles didn't result from her skin color. She kept denying her privilege and continued to ignore its existence. I should have linked her to Macintosh's article.
Yeah, I hope she'd benefit from reading it. I think it's a hard pill for some people to swallow, though. That might be why Macintosh compared white privilege to male privilege. It's harder to recognize one's own privilege, which is what she was trying to get at. I think it was a smart comparison because it makes you think, oh shoot, maybe I am like men and have privilege, and I didn't even realize it.
On that note, I was on Twitter the other day and I saw a tweet from our notorious president. He said, as has been stated by numerous legal scholars, I have the absolute right to pardon myself. But why would I do that when I have done nothing wrong? He wrote pardon in all caps. There have already been several articles talking about this tweet, such as the New York Times and CNN. When I read this tweet, I thought it was ridiculous. Clearly, Trump is using his white privilege in his presidential reign. The New York Times article stated that in 1974, Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel Mary C. Lawton said about Nixon's Watergate scandal that Nixon could not pardon himself because such a pardon would appear to violate the fundamental rule that no one may be judged in his own case. Although this tweet is in regards to the Russian case, this goes to show that Trump uses his white privilege and embraces it as well, although it is hurting this country's welfare.
That's honestly too crazy for me to wrap my head around. For him to be able to say that he can pardon himself sounds like privilege to me. In one of the other articles we read for class, I remember Ta-Nehisi Coates talking about how Trump is able to get away with a lot more stuff than Obama ever could. I feel like this is a really good example of that.
You're so right. Why don't we switch over and give some examples from our own life experiences? What were some major events that changed your perspective towards literacy in your lives?
I guess I'll start us off. This is something that I'm a little bit embarrassed to talk about, but I feel like it's important for the topic of literacy, and I feel like it also kind of ties into privilege as well. So back in kindergarten, I had a speech problem. I had a very difficult time saying the letter R, which occasionally to this day I struggle with a few weird words that have a bunch of R's in them. Luckily, my school had a speech counselor. Her only job was to help kids with speech problems. I had the opportunity to have lessons with this teacher, and we'd play a bunch of different board games and speech games to correct my speech problem. The reason I said this might have to do with privilege is that I don't know if all schools have these sort of opportunities. I went to a private Montessori school, and we had a lot of other resources, but I don't know if other schools were able to have the same experience.
Well, mine doesn't have much to do with privilege or racism, but I wanted to talk about how I began to like writing. So the summer before freshman year of high school, I took a creative writing class at this summer program called Upward Bound, which is for low-income and first-generation students. During the summer, we spent 5 weeks in class at the local community college. So that one summer, I had this amazing writing teacher. She was super fun and chill, and everyone loved her. Before going to class, I always had butterflies in my stomach because I didn't want to go. I hated writing so much that I dreaded going every single day. But once I was there, I had so much fun. She was very helpful when it came to creative writing, and she encouraged me to explore the writing world. I remember one time I had written a short story for the class as an assignment, and she wanted to use it as an example for her future courses. I was so happy to hear that, and it helped me realize that maybe I'm not all that bad at writing. Since that summer, it helped me boost my confidence and made me consider a future as a creative writer.
My story is more focused on cultural literacy. A few years ago, I was introduced to the show Hamilton, a rap musical written specifically to be performed by people of color. The show tells the story of the founding father, Alexander Hamilton, but through hip-hop to relate to today's generation. Growing up, I've always been a huge theater lover, but it was always hard for me to personally relate to it because most principal roles were played by white people. So when I found that a show like Hamilton existed, I was shocked and excited. I automatically was given reassurance that my dream wasn't impossible and became obsessed with theater all over again. Hamilton hasn't only shown me that people of color can make it to Broadway, but it also made history in theater. Being the first of its kind, it's inspired so many, like me, to follow their dreams and regain hope. I believe that it's so important to spread diversity in a place where the population is predominantly white. While Broadway continues to have a lot of mainly white shows, Hamilton was a huge step in the right direction, and I hope to see many more like it in the future.
All right, looks like we've made it to the end of our segment. I feel like we've had a good conversation about the connection between privilege and immigration. Minaj and McIntosh do a great job at discussing and revealing privilege. Then Minaj goes on to talk about his experiences in an immigrant family, which we relate to how immigration is viewed today, because this is still a very relevant topic. Then at the end, we got a little bit personal and talked about our own stories of how we came to learn the English language. Well, that wraps up our segment here on the Anteater Nation podcast. See you guys next time.